The sound of gunshots echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory as Hannah Evans ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. It was 1875, and she had only been in Sweetwater for 3 weeks when the bank robbery turned the sleepy town into a battleground. Clutching her medical bag, she peered cautiously around the splintered wood, watching as the last of the outlaws galloped away, leaving carnage in their wake. Hannah wasn't like other women who had ventured west. At 26, she was a trained physician who had fought tooth and nail to earn her medical degree back in Boston. Her father had called her stubborn. Her mother had called her impossible. But out here in this untamed land, she was simply trying to be useful. "Someone help!" a woman screamed from the direction of the saloon. "There's a man bleeding out here." Without hesitation, Hannah gathered her skirts and ran toward the commotion, dodging frantic townspeople and debris from the shootout. Outside the Rusty Nail Saloon, a crowd had gathered around a fallen figure in the dirt. "Give him space," Hannah commanded, her voice firm as she pushed through the onlookers. "I'm a doctor." The whispers began immediately. A lady doctor was still something of a marvel in these parts, but Hannah paid them no mind. Her focus was entirely on the man lying face down in the dust, blood soaking through his shirt. "Help me turn him over carefully," she instructed 2 bystanders. As they rolled him onto his back, Hannah got her first good look at him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong jawline now clenched in pain. His hat had fallen away, revealing dark hair streaked with dust. A cowboy, by the looks of his worn leather chaps and boots with spurs. "He took a bullet trying to stop those devils," the bartender explained. "Rode in just this morning. Don't even know his name." Hannah quickly assessed his wounds. A bullet had torn through his left shoulder, and another had grazed his side. Serious, but not immediately fatal if treated properly. "I need to get him somewhere clean," she said, already working to stem the bleeding. "Is there a room available in the saloon?" The owner of the Rusty Nail nodded. "Got one upstairs. Not much, but it's clean enough." With the help of several men, they carried the unconscious cowboy up the narrow stairs and laid him on a simple bed. Hannah shooed everyone out except for Lottie, one of the saloon girls who volunteered to assist. "Bring me hot water, clean linens, and whiskey," Hannah instructed as she cut away the man's bloodied shirt. Beneath the fabric, his chest was tanned and muscular, marred now by angry wounds. For hours, Hannah worked diligently, extracting the bullet from his shoulder, cleaning the wounds, and stitching him up with practiced hands. The cowboy remained unconscious throughout, occasionally groaning but never waking. By the time she finished, night had fallen, and Hannah's back ached from bending over her patient. "You should get some rest, Doc," Lottie said, bringing in a fresh basin of water. "I can sit with him for a spell." Hannah shook her head. "The next few hours are critical. I'll stay." Lottie gave her a knowing look. "Suit yourself. He's a handsome one, ain't he?" Hannah felt a flush creep up her neck but maintained her professional demeanor. "I wouldn't know. I'm only concerned with his recovery." After Lottie left, Hannah settled into a chair beside the bed. The cowboy's breathing had steadied, but fever had set in an expected but worrisome development. Through the night, she bathed his forehead with cool cloths, changed his bandages, and monitored his pulse. As dawn broke, casting golden light through the dusty window, the cowboy stirred. Hannah had dozed off in her chair but woke instantly when she heard him groan. "Water," he rasped, his voice deep and rough. Hannah reached for the glass on the nightstand and gently helped him raise his head to drink. His eyes opened, revealing irises the color of a summer storm, intense gray with hints of blue. "Easy now," she soothed. "You've lost a lot of blood." After a few sips, he tried to sit up, wincing in pain. Hannah helped the cowboy sit up, supporting his back with her arm, careful not to disturb his bandages. "You should have left me," he muttered, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar room before settling on her face. Hannah met his gaze steadily. "I don't leave people," she replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Especially not when they need help." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence between them charged with something Hannah couldn't quite name. "Name's Matthew Daniels," he finally said, his voice gaining strength. "And I suppose I owe you my life, Mississippi?" "Dr. Evans." "Hannah Evans," she corrected gently. "And you don't owe me anything, Mr. Daniels, though staying in bed until you heal would be payment enough." A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Doctor, is it? Well, that's a first for me." "I imagine it is for most people out here," Hannah replied, checking his bandages. "The wound looks clean, but you'll need to rest for at least a week. Any movement could reopen the stitches." Matthew frowned. "A week? I can't stay put that long. He stopped abruptly, as if catching himself before revealing too much. Hannah raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Everyone in these parts had secrets, and she'd learned not to pry. "Well, unless you want to bleed to death, you'll have to adjust your plans." He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decide something important. "You're not from around here," he finally stated. "Boston," Hannah confirmed, packing her medical supplies. "I came west 3 weeks ago." "Why?" The question was direct, curious rather than accusatory. Hannah paused, considering how much to share with this stranger whose life she'd just saved. "There wasn't much use for a female physician in Boston, despite my qualifications. Out here, people are less particular when they're bleeding." Matthew chuckled, then winced at the pain it caused. "Fair enough. And Sweetwater's lucky to have you, Dr. Evans." Over the next few days, Hannah visited Matthew regularly, changing his bandages and monitoring his recovery. Despite her insistence that he rest, she often found him sitting up in bed, sometimes even standing by the window, staring out at the street below with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something or someone. "You're the worst patient I've ever had," she declared on the 4th day, finding him fully dressed and pulling on his boots. "And how many patients have you had exactly?" He countered with a half-smile that did strange things to Hannah's composure. "Enough to know trouble when I see it," she retorted, crossing her arms. "Where do you think you're going?" Matthew sighed, sitting back on the edge of the bed. "Just need some air. Document walls are closing in." Hannah softened slightly. She understood the feeling all too well. "I'll make you a deal. You can come with me to check on Mrs. Peterson's new baby, but then straight back here to rest." His eyes lit up at the prospect of freedom, however brief. "Lead the way, Dr. Evans." As they walked slowly through town, Hannah was acutely aware of Matthew's presence beside her. He moved with a natural grace despite his injuries, tipping his hat to ladies they passed and nodding respectfully to the men. Several people called out greetings, thanking him for his bravery during the bank robbery. "Seems you've become something of a local hero," Hannah observed. Matthew shrugged his good shoulder. "Just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Hannah disagreed. "Most people ran for cover." They reached Mrs. Peterson's small cabin on the edge of town. The new mother was delighted to see Hannah and curious about her handsome companion. While Hannah examined the healthy baby boy, Matthew sat awkwardly in the kitchen, clearly out of his element but trying to be polite as Mr. Peterson engaged him in conversation about cattle prices. On their walk back, Matthew seemed more relaxed. "You're good with them," he commented. "The Petersons, the baby, they trust you." "Trust is earned," Hannah replied, "and necessary for a doctor." People need to believe you can help them before they'll let you try. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. Same with horses, he said. Can't break a wild one without earning its trust first. Is that what you do? Break horses. A shadow crossed his face. Among other things, I worked ranches mostly from Texas to Montana. Hannah sensed there was more to his story, but again she didn't push. They walked in comfortable silence back to the saloon, where Matthew reluctantly agreed to rest for the remainder of the day. As the week progressed, Matthew's strength returned rapidly. Hannah found herself looking forward to their conversations, which ranged from her medical training to his adventures across the Western Territories. He was well read for a cowboy, quoting Shakespeare and discussing politics with equal ease. He never spoke of family or where exactly he called home, and Hannah respected his privacy. On the 7th day, Hannah arrived at the saloon to find Matthew's room empty, his few possessions gone. A weight settled in her chest, heavier than she wanted to acknowledge. She told herself it was natural for him to move on. Men like Matthew Daniels didn't stay in one place for long. "Looking for your cowboy?" Lottie asked, catching Hannah standing in the doorway of the vacant room. "He settled his bill this morning," said something about checking on his horse at the livery. Without thinking too much about why, Hannah headed straight for the stables. She found Matthew saddling a magnificent black stallion, his movements sure despite his healing wounds. "Were you planning to leave without saying goodbye?" Hannah asked, startling him. Matthew turned, his expression unreadable. "Figured it was better that way." "Better for whom?" Hannah approached, reaching out to stroke the horse's velvety nose. "Your stitches should come out before you ride off." "I can manage," he said, but made no move to continue saddling his horse. Hannah crossed her arms. "Or I could remove them properly, and you could leave without risking infection." "Your choice, Mr. Daniels." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always the doctor." Back at her small office behind the general store, Hannah worked silently, removing the neat stitches from Matthew's shoulder and side. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, the muscles tense. "You've healed well," she said professionally, though she was acutely aware of his proximity. "Just be careful not to overexert yourself for another week or so." Matthew nodded, pulling his shirt back on once she finished. "I appreciate everything you've done, Dr. Evans." "Hannah," she corrected softly. "I think after saving your life, you can call me Hannah." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed over these past days, fragile but undeniable. "Hannah," he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "I wish things were different." She straightened her spine, refusing to show disappointment. "Different how, Mr. Daniels?" "Matthew," he insisted with a small smile. "And different in ways I can't explain right now. But I want you to know that meeting you has been." He paused, searching for words, unexpected, in the best way. Hannah wasn't sure what to say to that. Part of her wanted to demand explanations, to understand why he seemed so determined to leave. Another part, the practical doctor who had survived in a man's profession, knew better than to expect anything from a drifter, no matter how compelling his gray-blue eyes might be. "Well, should you ever pass through Sweetwater again and find yourself in need of medical attention, you know where to find me," she said lightly, turning away to clean her instruments. Matthew stepped closer, gently turning her to face him. "Hannah Evans, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. Then he was gone, the bell over the door jingling in his wake. Hannah stood frozen, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. She had known him for only a week, yet somehow the thought of never seeing him again felt like losing something precious before it had a chance to begin. The next morning, Hannah threw herself into her work, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. She treated Mr. Wilson's gout, set young Tommy Clark's broken wrist, and delivered medicine to the widow Collins on the edge of town. Routine tasks that should have brought her satisfaction now felt mechanical. As she walked back toward town in the late afternoon, a cloud of dust on the horizon caught her attention. Riders were approaching too fast for casual travelers. Hannah quickened her pace, a sense of foreboding settling over her. By the time she reached the main street, chaos had erupted. 6 men on horseback had ridden into town, guns drawn. People scattered, diving into buildings or behind water troughs. Sheriff Taylor stood in front of his office, his deputy beside him, both with rifles aimed at the intruders. "We don't want trouble," the sheriff called out. "State your business." The leader of the riders, a heavy-set man with a bushy beard and a scar across his cheek, sneered. "We're looking for a man. Goes by Matthew Daniels these days. Word is he was here." Hannah's blood ran cold. The way he said, "these days," suggested Matthew had other names, other identities. "Don't know anyone by that name," Sheriff Taylor lied, his stance steady. Hannah knew the sheriff was aware of Matthew. Everyone in town had heard about the cowboy who'd tried to stop the bank robbers. But something in the sheriff's eyes told her he knew more than he was letting on. The leader spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "That's funny, because we tracked him here. And Jed Hawkins doesn't like being made a fool of." "Well, Jed Hawkins?" The sheriff emphasized the name with disdain. "You're welcome to water your horses and move on, but I won't have you terrorizing my town." For a tense moment, it seemed like the standoff might erupt into violence. Then Hawkins laughed, an ugly sound devoid of humor. "We'll be staying at the hotel. But make no mistake, if Daniels is here or if anyone's hiding him, there'll be hell to pay." As the riders moved toward the hotel, Hannah slipped into the sheriff's office, determined to get answers. "Sheriff Taylor," she began without preamble, "who is Matthew Daniels, really? And why are those men looking for him?" The older man sighed heavily, setting his rifle aside. "Sit down, Dr. Evans. I reckon you deserve to know, seeing as you saved his life." Hannah perched on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Matthew Daniels is his real name, far as I know," Sheriff Taylor explained, pouring 2 cups of coffee and handing one to Hannah. "But he's better known in certain circles as the Ghost, one of the best trackers and bounty hunters in the territories." "A bounty hunter?" Hannah repeated, stunned. The gentle, well-read man who had quoted poetry and smiled at Mrs. Peterson's baby seemed at odds with this description. "Not the usual kind," the sheriff clarified. "Daniels has a reputation for bringing in his targets alive when others would shoot first and collect the reward regardless. He's also known for refusing to hunt innocent men, even with bounties on their heads. Made him some powerful enemies." "Like Jed Hawkins?" Sheriff Taylor nodded grimly. "Hawkins runs a gang that specializes in cattle rustling and worse. Word is Daniels was tracking one of Hawkins's men who's wanted for murder in Colorado. Must have followed the trail here, only to get caught up in our bank robbery." Hannah tried to process this information. It explained Matthew's reticence about his past, his constant vigilance, even while injured. And now Hawkins is hunting him instead. "Appears so," the sheriff agreed. "Daniels left yesterday heading north, but if Hawkins caught his trail..." He didn't need to finish the thought. Hannah stood abruptly. "We have to warn him." Sheriff Taylor shook his head. "Too dangerous, Doctor. Daniels can take care of himself and you'd only put yourself at risk. Besides, Hawkins and his men will be watching for anyone leaving town." But Hannah was already formulating a plan. "Not everyone," she said determinedly. "I make regular visits to outlying homesteads. No one would question me riding out to check on patients. Dr. Evans, Hannah, the sheriff implored. This isn't your fight. Hannah thought of Matthew's words to her that first day. You should have left me. And her reply, I don't leave people. It became my fight when I saved his life, she said firmly. I'm not abandoning him now. Despite the sheriff's protests, Hannah left his office resolved. She would need to be careful, but she couldn't ignore the danger Matthew was in, especially since he had no idea he was being followed. Early the next morning, Hannah packed her medical bag with extra supplies, strapped her father's old revolver to her saddle, a precaution she rarely took, and rode out on her sturdy mare, Penny. She told anyone who asked that she was checking on the Anderson family, whose youngest had come down with a fever earlier in the week. The Andersons did indeed live north of town, in the direction Matthew had headed, so her story wasn't entirely fabrication. Hannah visited them first, examining little Sarah Anderson and pronouncing her on the mend. Then she continued north, following the main trail that wound through increasingly rugged country. By midday, Hannah had reached a fork in the trail. One path continued north toward the mountains, while the other veered west toward the next settlement. She hesitated, unsure which way Matthew would have gone. Looking down, she noticed fresh hoofprints heading west, multiple horses, moving fast. Hawkins and his men, she guessed. They must have picked up Matthew's trail. Making a quick decision, Hannah urged Penny onto the western path. She rode cautiously, keeping to the trees when possible and listening for sounds of riders ahead. The terrain grew more difficult, with steep ravines and rocky outcrops that slowed her progress. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Hannah spotted a thin wisp of smoke rising above the trees about half a mile ahead. A campfire carefully made to produce minimal smoke. She dismounted, tethered Penny to a tree, and proceeded on foot, her heart racing. Drawing closer, Hannah could make out a small clearing beside a creek. A single figure sat beside the fire, his back to her. Even from a distance, she recognized Matthew's broad shoulders and the set of his hat. She was about to call out when instinct made her pause. Something felt wrong. The clearing was too exposed, the fire too obvious for a man who knew he might be followed. Hannah scanned the surrounding trees and rocks, her hand moving to the revolver tucked in her skirt pocket. There a glint of metal among the rocks above the clearing. And there the shadow of a man behind a large pine. With mounting horror, Hannah realized Matthew was surrounded. Hawkins and his men had found him and were closing in. Without thinking, Hannah grabbed a stone and threw it hard, striking a tree near Matthew's head. He reacted instantly, diving away from the fire just as a shot rang out, kicking up dirt where he had been sitting moments before. Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from multiple directions as Matthew rolled behind a boulder, drawing his own weapon and returning fire. Hannah crouched behind a fallen log, her mind racing. She had to help him somehow, but she was hopelessly outgunned. Suddenly, Matthew's voice carried across the clearing. I know you're out there, whoever threw that stone. If you can hear me, ride for the sheriff. I'll hold them off. Hannah couldn't leave, not when Matthew was fighting for his life. Instead, she worked her way around the edge of the clearing, staying low and moving from tree to tree. She spotted one of Hawkins's men positioned behind a rock outcropping, his attention fixed on Matthew's position. Taking a deep breath, Hannah raised her father's revolver. She had learned to shoot back in Boston, her father insisting that a woman living alone should be able to protect herself. She aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it had the desired effect. The man whirled around, momentarily distracted, and Matthew seized the opportunity to take aim and fire. The outlaw crumpled to the ground. Hannah! Matthew's incredulous voice carried across the clearing. Is that you? Get out of here. I told you, she called back, ducking as bullets splintered the tree above her. I don't leave people. For the next few minutes, which felt like hours, Hannah and Matthew fought side by side, though separated by the width of the clearing. She provided distractions when possible, firing her limited rounds carefully. Matthew, clearly the more experienced fighter, methodically picked off Hawkins's men one by one. When her revolver clicked empty, Hannah felt a surge of panic. She was now defenseless, and by her count, at least 2 outlaws remained, including Hawkins himself. I'm out of ammunition, she called to Matthew. Stay down and don't move, he shouted back, his voice tight with concern. But it was too late. Hannah felt rough hands grab her from behind, yanking her to her feet. Jed Hawkins pressed the cold barrel of his pistol against her temple. Drop your gun, Daniels, or the lady doctor gets a bullet in her pretty head, Hawkins bellowed. Hannah could see Matthew from across the clearing, his face a mask of fury and fear. Slowly, deliberately, he stood and tossed his revolver aside. Let her go, Hawkins, Matthew said, his voice deadly calm. She has nothing to do with this. Hawkins laughed, the sound grating against Hannah's ear. Seems she does now. What's a fine lady doctor doing out here shooting at my men? Unless she means something to you. He tightened his grip on Hannah's arm, making her wince. The ghost has a weakness after all. This is between you and me, Matthew insisted, taking a careful step forward. The doctor was just passing by. Wrong place, wrong time. Hannah's mind raced. She knew Matthew was trying to protect her, to minimize her importance to him. But she also knew Hawkins wasn't buying it. Nice try, Hawkins sneered. But I saw how you looked when she called out. She matters to you. Which means she's my ticket to making you suffer before I kill you. Hannah felt the barrel press harder against her temple. In that moment, a strange calm washed over her. If she was going to die, it wouldn't be as a helpless hostage. Mr. Hawkins, she said steadily, I'm a doctor, which means I know exactly where to hurt a man. Before he could process her words, Hannah drove her elbow hard into his stomach, simultaneously stomping on his instep with all her strength. As his grip loosened in surprise and pain, she twisted away. Matthew seized the moment, lunging forward with incredible speed. He tackled Hawkins to the ground, and the 2 men grappled fiercely, rolling in the dirt. Hawkins's gun went off, the shot going wild. Hannah scrambled for cover, her heart in her throat as she watched the life-or-death struggle. Though still recovering from his wounds, Matthew fought with the determination of a man protecting something precious. He managed to pin Hawkins down, delivering a powerful blow that rendered the outlaw unconscious. For a moment, the clearing was eerily quiet. Matthew remained kneeling over Hawkins, breathing heavily, his knuckles bloodied. Then, as if suddenly remembering Hannah, he looked up. Are you hurt? He asked urgently, rising to his feet. Hannah shook her head, though she was trembling now that the danger had passed. I'm all right. Matthew crossed the clearing in long strides, pulling her into his arms with a fierceness that took her breath away. You could have been killed, he murmured into her hair. What were you thinking, following me? Hannah pulled back just enough to look up at him. I was thinking that I don't leave people, she said simply. Especially not when they're in danger. Matthew's expression softened, a mix of exasperation and something much warmer. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Dr. Evans. So I've been told, she replied, managing a small smile despite the circumstances. Their moment was interrupted by a groan from one of the wounded outlaws. Matthew's posture immediately tensed as he surveyed the clearing, assessing threats with practiced eyes. We need to secure Hawkins and his men, then get you back to town, he said, his voice returning to business-like efficiency. Sheriff Taylor should send a posse when Penny returns without you. Hannah blinked. Penny? My horse. Matthew nodded, already moving to retrieve rope from his saddlebags. I untethered her when the shooting started. She'll head back to town, horses usually do when they're spooked and know where home is. Working together, they bound the surviving outlaws, including Hawkins, who regained consciousness only to glare murderously at them both. Matthew collected the outlaws' weapons, keeping one trained on their prisoners at all times. As darkness fell, they built up the fire and settled in to wait for help. Matthew insisted Hannah take his bedroll, though she protested that she was perfectly capable of keeping watch. "I know you are," he said with unexpected gentleness. "You've proven that today. But you've been through enough, and one of us should rest." Too exhausted to argue further, Hannah wrapped herself in the blanket that smelled faintly of leather and pine like Matthew. Despite the day's trauma, she felt oddly safe with him standing guard nearby. "Matthew," she said softly, watching the firelight play across his features, "the sheriff told me who you really are." He stiffened slightly but didn't turn. "And what did he tell you?" "That you're a bounty hunter. The ghost, they call you." She paused. "Why didn't you tell me yourself?" Matthew sighed, finally looking at her. "It's not a life many would understand, especially not someone like you, who dedicates herself to saving lives." "You think I judge you?" Hannah asked, sitting up. "After the sheriff explained that you bring in your bounties alive, that you refuse to hunt innocent men? That sounds like justice to me, not something to hide." Matthew moved closer, sitting beside her on a fallen log. "It's not just that," he admitted. "This life always on the move, always in danger, it's not one I'd ask anyone to share. And when I met you—" He trailed off, searching for words. "When you met me, what?" Hannah prompted gently. "When I met you," he continued, his voice low and honest, "I started to wonder if there might be something worth stopping for." The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than their embrace had been. "Then why were you leaving?" Hannah asked, needing to understand. "Because Hawkins and men like him will always be after me," Matthew explained. "As long as I have enemies, anyone close to me is in danger. I thought by leaving, I was protecting you." Hannah reached out, taking his rough hand in hers. "Has it occurred to you that perhaps I don't need protecting? That I might want a choice in the matter?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "It's becoming increasingly clear that you're not a woman who needs protection, Dr. Evans." "Hannah," she corrected again. "Hannah," he repeated, his voice warming her more than the fire. They fell silent, hands still joined, each lost in their own thoughts as they waited for dawn and the help they hoped would come. The sheriff's posse arrived shortly after sunrise, led by Deputy Jenkins. Just as Matthew had predicted, Penny had returned to town riderless, raising the alarm. Sheriff Taylor had sent men immediately, though they'd had to track carefully in the dark. "Quite a situation you've gotten yourself into, Dr. Evans," Sheriff Taylor commented as his men secured the prisoners for transport. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. Stubborn as they come, your father always said." Hannah smiled faintly. He would know. The journey back to Sweetwater was slow with the wounded outlaws. Matthew rode beside Hannah, frequently glancing her way as if to reassure himself she was really there, unharmed. They spoke little, both aware of the unresolved questions between them. Hawkins and his surviving men were locked securely in the town jail, awaiting transfer to the territorial court. The bounties on their heads would be substantial, rightfully Matthew's reward for their capture. "What will you do now?" Hannah asked as they stood outside the sheriff's office, the bustle of the town resuming around them as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Matthew looked thoughtful, his gray-blue eyes studying her face. "I have some thinking to do," he said finally, "but I'd like to talk more when you're rested. Perhaps dinner tomorrow." Hannah nodded, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through together. "I'd like that." True to his word, Matthew appeared at her door the following evening, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He took her to the hotel dining room, the nicest establishment in Sweetwater, where they attracted curious glances from the other patrons. Over dinner, Matthew shared more of his past, how he'd become a bounty hunter after his brother was murdered by an outlaw who escaped justice, how he'd made it his mission to bring criminals to face proper trials rather than vigilante violence. "But I've been thinking," he said, pushing his plate aside and looking at Hannah intently. "Maybe it's time for a change." "What kind of change?" she asked, her heart beating a little faster at the seriousness in his eyes. "The kind where a man puts down roots," Matthew replied, "where he uses his skills for something more settled." Hannah set down her fork. "And what brought on these thoughts of settling?" Matthew smiled, the expression transforming his usually guarded face. "A stubborn doctor who doesn't leave people." "That sounds promising," Hannah said carefully. "But what would this settled life look like, exactly?" "I've been talking with Sheriff Taylor," Matthew explained. "The town council has been trying to hire a deputy with tracking experience, someone who knows the territory. The sheriff suggested I might be a good fit." Hannah couldn't hide her surprise. "You'd stay in Sweetwater? As a deputy?" Matthew nodded slowly. "If there was someone worth staying for." His eyes held hers, the question implicit. "And the danger?" Hannah asked, practical even as her heart soared. "You said yourself that men like Hawkins would always come after you." "There's risk in any life worth living," Matthew acknowledged. "But as a lawman with the backing of the territorial government, it would be different than being a lone bounty hunter. And," he added with a hint of humor, "I'd have a skilled doctor nearby to patch me up if needed." Hannah smiled despite herself. "You're a terrible patient, Mr. Daniels." "I could work on that," he promised, reaching across the table to take her hand, "if given the chance." Their courtship progressed swiftly after that night. Matthew took the deputy position, proving himself invaluable to Sheriff Taylor with his tracking skills and knowledge of criminal networks throughout the territories. Hannah's medical practice thrived as word of her abilities spread beyond Sweetwater. They complemented each other, Matthew's quiet strength balancing Hannah's determined spirit, her compassion softening his harder edges. The town watched with interest as the unlikely pair grew closer, though few knew the dramatic circumstances that had brought them together. 3 months after that fateful bank robbery, Matthew took Hannah riding into the foothills west of town. They stopped at a clearing overlooking a small valley, where a creek meandered through stands of cottonwood trees. "What do you think?" Matthew asked, gesturing to the picturesque scene before them. Hannah looked confused. "About what?" "The view? It's beautiful." "About building here," he clarified, a nervous edge to his voice. "A home." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Matthew?" He dismounted and helped her down from Penny, keeping his hands at her waist longer than necessary. "I've saved most of the bounty money from Hawkins and his gang. Enough to buy this land and build a proper house. I've already spoken to the land office." "You want to build a house?" Hannah repeated, trying to process what he was saying. "For us," Matthew said, taking her hands in his. "Hannah Evans, I never expected to find someone like you. Someone brave enough to face down outlaws, stubborn enough to save a man who thought he was beyond saving, and remarkable enough to make me want a future I'd given up on long ago." Hannah felt tears welling in her eyes as Matthew dropped to one knee before her. "I don't have much to offer except my heart and a promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me, Doctor?" Hannah laughed through her tears at his use of her title. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, I will marry you, Deputy." Matthew gathered her in his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of all they had survived together and all they hoped to build. They were married in the spring of 1876, in a ceremony attended by the entire town. Hannah wore a dress ordered from Denver, and Matthew looked uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit. Sheriff Taylor gave the bride away, joking that he'd known they were trouble from the moment they'd met. True to his word, Matthew built them a house on the land he'd shown Hannah, with a special room designated as her medical office. Hannah continued to treat patients there and in town, gaining a reputation throughout the territory for her skill and compassion. Matthew served as deputy sheriff for 5 years before being elected sheriff when Taylor retired. His reputation as the ghost faded, replaced by respect for Sheriff Daniels, known for his fair treatment of all citizens, regardless of background. They had their share of challenges: occasional outlaws seeking revenge, the harsh realities of frontier life, and the prejudice Hannah sometimes still faced as a female physician. But they faced each obstacle together, stronger for the bond that had formed in fire and danger. Their first child, a daughter named Elizabeth, was born in the winter of 1877, followed by a son, James, 2 years later. Hannah reduced her practice temporarily but never gave it up entirely, often bringing the children with her on visits to nearby homesteads. On the 5th anniversary of the day Hannah had found Matthew wounded outside the saloon, they sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the Wyoming landscape. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Hannah asked, her head resting on Matthew's shoulder. "If you hadn't been shot that day, or if I hadn't been so stubborn about treating you?" Matthew smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every day, I rode into Sweetwater tracking an outlaw, never expecting to find a home, a family." Hannah squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you were a terrible patient who couldn't follow doctor's orders to stay in bed. And I'm grateful for a doctor who doesn't leave people," Matthew replied, his voice tender, "even when they think they should be left." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking softly about the day's events, their children's antics, plans for the future. In the distance, coyotes called to one another across the vast open spaces of the Wyoming Territory. But on their porch, Matthew and Hannah Daniels had found something rare in the untamed West: a sense of permanence, of belonging, of home. The cowboy and the doctor, brought together by chance and bound by choice, had created their own frontier legend, not one of gunslingers and outlaws, but of healing, justice, and a love strong enough to overcome the wildness of the West.